there probably are earlier examples, but the disaster movie genre that we know and love today truly kicked into gear in 1970 with the release of Airport, which was essentially a terrorist bomb thriller which showed the effect of the incident across most areas of the airport itself. Now, this was a star-studded affair featuring Burt Lancaster, Dean Martin, Gene Seberg, etc. and was a big enough hit to inspire a few sequels. Airport 75 in 75, and this Airport 77 in, that's right, 1977. Followed by the awkwardly titled The Concorde Airport 1979, which I haven't seen but looks so bonkers that it's got to be great. Anyway, why have I picked out the 1977 entry to talk about in this video? Well, let's take a look. So the Airport series may have started as a disaster drama series, but it rapidly shifted into what this film is, which is basically an action thriller with a plot that would be perfectly at home as the blurb on a 90s action movie VHS cover. So here we have millionaire businessman Philip Stevens, played by the immortal James Stewart, who's planning on turning his mansion into a public museum so they can view his priceless art collection. And he's organised his company's latest fancy plane to bring in all of his treasures along with a bunch of guests for some reason. Anyway, what he doesn't know is that his co-pilot and the stewards on the airliner are thieves planning a heist of the artworks, and that their crime will put everyone on board in deadly peril. And in a case of really bad luck, the eventually hijacked plane hits some fog, collides with an oil rig and goes down in the Bermuda Triangle. To make matters even worse, the plane sinks below the ocean with its passengers and crew, but not too low that the pressure affects anyone, and also manages to keep all the plane's lights on. And then what unfolds is the usual disaster movie staple of all these little dramas unfolding as the cast await a possible rescue. And before I read out one of the most astonishing cast lists of any film ever, I do want to mention a disaster movie staple that I'd never really noticed until I rewatched both The Towering Inferno and The Poseidon Adventure relatively recently, and that's this sometimes quite jarring musical interlude that they all share. Here it's a blind pianist who comes across as some sort of white Stevie Wonder and hilariously brings Kathleen Quinlan to the verge of tears with a ballad that's made of pure cheddar. Hold you in my life forever, just keep on loving you. Now, these films have become the subject of parody over the years, with the excellent Airplane spoiling any attempt at sincerity that these films may once have had. A bit like Austin Powers did with the Roger Moore Bond era. But there was a time when they were the big budget mega productions. You only have to scan the cast list of this film. James Stewart, Christopher Lee, Jack Lemmon, Olivia de Havilland, James Booth, Joseph Cotton, George Kennedy, the list goes on and on. Now, cramming all this star power into a movie doesn't necessarily make a great film, and Airport 77 can't really be counted among the greats in a traditional sense. But like a lot of films I talk about on this channel, it features a level of charm or entertainment to make it worthy of watching. And I do love the setup in films like this, sometimes probably more than the eventual disaster itself. And here we get to follow one of the hijackers who puts together a hilarious disguise as he makes a mockery of airport security, eventually boarding the plane and putting his evil scheme into action. Now, I do enjoy the fact that the opening act of the film does mostly zip along at a fair pace, and maybe that's the villainous plot that's set up. This being a heist film also, as opposed to the disaster element being a rogue wave or a building's faulty wiring. So here the baddies are going to gas all the passengers, but not before we get the usual daytime TV character arcs to help flesh out our cast. My favourite being Christopher Lee as Dr. Wallace. He's a scientist trying to save the world's hunger problems with plankton or something.
You men are so lucky. I wish I had a hobby like yours.
A plan that can harvest the seas for food and save millions of people from starvation can hardly be called a hobby.
Which he conveniently but pointlessly explains to his wife, an excellent Lee Grant. Grant's probably the standout in the cast for me personally, to be honest, as Mrs. Wallace. She immediately gets into some hard boozing, and a sarcastic and emotionally unstable attitude makes a bad situation worse. But fair play to the moment she gets punched out for being a nuisance because it's a series highlight.
Stop it!
anyway, once the heist has gone horribly wrong, and the plane has clipped the oil rig and plunged beneath the waves, this sends her and the rest of the cast into panic mode when faced with a watery grave. And just quick, a shout out to George Kennedy, a series recurring character, Joe Petroni, who turns up in this film just to stand around in the background in a few scenes. So as I mentioned, this was the third in the Airport series, and although it was successful, despite being a bit trashy, I can't help feel like it really misses a trick or two. So the plane's nose is actually hanging off some kind of underwater cliff, and a plot device of having the cliff edge give way is suggested quite late into the film, and I feel like this should have been more of a focus and would have really provided a lot more tension than just having the plane slowly springing leaks. So even if you've never seen this or any other Airport movie, but you have the most fleeting familiarity with the disaster genre, you'll know the drill here. Assembling some A-list talent that may be a little bit past their prime, put them all through absolute hell, maybe kill a few off to create some tension and uncertainty, and finally bring in the emergency services just when you think all hope is lost for your grand finale. Yet despite this familiarity, there's still undeniable fun to be had in watching disaster movies, even more so if they're bad. Here the victims are mostly just rich idiots, so it's okay to take some pleasure in their extreme suffering. We don't have to feel sorry for them because, you know, they've had a good innings. Now, the only person I did feel a little bit sorry for throughout was James Stewart, who's one of the greatest Hollywood stars in cinema history. Here gets the thankless job of standing around looking worried for pretty much the entire film. And Jack Lemmon, another screen giant, does get a little bit more to do as the captain of the plane, who also has masters of engineering and diving experience, handily enough, and spends half the film absolutely drenched.
Don't get too close to the door.
So this film was directed by prolific TV director Jerry Jameson, who does a decent job of what he has to work with, even if he can't quite manage to shake off his TV show pedigree. Even in a well-staged but not really that exciting finale featuring an underwater rescue attempt. Interestingly, 3 years later, Jameson would direct Raise the Titanic, that is a very similar finale to Airport 77. So by this point, disaster movies were nearing the end of their run, really. One that had arguably peaked with 1974's The Towering Inferno. There'd be a final roll of the dice with Concorde Airport 79 before they took a much needed hiatus, before being resurrected again in CGI in the 90s with films that were entertaining in their own right, but nothing in comparison to the splendid nonsense of films like this. Go check it out.